Hey guys, so in this video, I want to talk about a repair that I recently did where a friend of mine reached out to me. They had a charge controller for their solar system. They have this van that they've been fitting with solar panels and everything for some pretty cool stuff. And they were working on it, they were installing it, and it had three big terminals, one for in, one for ground, and then an output, I believe. And it broke right off. He showed me the unit itself, and it hadn't destroyed any pads or anything like that, so I thought it was possible, but he said he wasn't able to solder it on. Looking at the block, looking at everything, immediately could tell that, well, your iron is probably under 100 watts. You're going to need way more heat and a consistent amount of it in order to melt any of that solder and get anything up to temperature for the solder to take. If you wanted, I said we could try the hot air station. That might be able to work. So he reached out and came over a couple day or so later, brought it in, and we threw it on the bench. Immediately, I knew we were in trouble though. The bottom of the circuit board is just an aluminum plate. Like the board has an aluminum plate for the bottom of it, and it's built into it. It was a very interesting design I hadn't really seen before. And this was all for thermal displacement. This was to radiate the heat and wick heat away from the circuit board itself. So I took the hot air station, cranked it up to 500 C max power, and just waved it underneath the bottom of that plate. Now, I wasn't able to heat from the top down because there was a plastic connector right next to it, as well as electrolytic caps nearby, and I just didn't want to risk damaging the unit itself. I didn't want to make it more broke. So the safest thing to do was to heat it up underneath. I did that for about a little over 5 minutes. And after 5 minutes, my feeling like this was going to work quickly took a nosedive. And I started even saying, like, I don't know if this is going to work. I don't, I don't know if, we're going to be able to do it. And I brought up that I do have a hot plate and we could try to heat it up from that. But I mentioned to him repeatedly, I don't know how well this is going to go. It may cause more problems than it solves, but it's an option if you want to try it. He was like, "Yeah, I don't really care anymore. I just want to get it working." So we throw the whole board on the hot plate with the big thermal aluminum plate on it straight down and turned it on. We set it for 300 C, but I think we only got to like 280 before I shut it down. At around 250 or so, and this is the temperature that the hot plate's at. Keep in mind you have several layers to cut through, but we noticed the flux that was on there from his attempts to solder and me prepping it started smoking, so we knew it was getting up to temperature. The lug was sitting on there, wanted to get hot, and at one point I couldn't really see the solder moving, and I took the wire itself and I pressed into it and it melted instantly. And it kept feeding and feeding, and so eventually it beat it up. And so I just started feeding it like that along until I got a little bit of a bead back, and then I kept feeding and feeding. I did that on the front where we could see it, and then I went along the back and did the same thing. Those were the two main connection points in how the board works. So it seemed like the most accurate way, the best way to do it. Once I got it on there with the beads of solder, I was like, I think this might work. So we turned off the hot plate and we let it cool down. And this took a while. We didn't want to press our luck or anything, so we just let it cool down very slowly. After it got to about 150 C on the plate, we went ahead and pulled it off and let it cool. As it was cooling down, at a point, I'm like, all right, it's not too hot. It's too hot to touch for a long period of time, but I can touch it for a second, so it's not insanely hot. And I took my pliers and put it inside the little terminal hole and lifted the whole board up. And the board is fairly heavy too, so this is quite a bit of weight on there. That was our first test, and it felt really good. Once we let it cool down a little bit more, I really kind of tried to twist it off, tried to break it off, tried to see if it would come loose again. It didn't. It felt really, really solid. Client did the same thing. My buddy did the same thing with it, just tried to pop it off. It wouldn't. I'm like, I think we might have it. But a little tiny piece of me, astonished as I was that it worked, was like, yeah, but we probably broke it. We probably cooked something on there. There was a bunch of stuff on there where I'm like, I wonder if I was supposed to take that off first. I don't know. Really didn't read any of this stuff. My buddy had the van with him, so when he pulled up, so we went ahead and went outside and installed it. It took about 20 minutes or so, and he also had to drill it in and everything so it would be permanent, wouldn't be moving around or anything, and that would reduce any strain on it. I had a little bit of concerns because when I saw the board, it had those three terminals and they were just there. And I was thinking, well, what if the one I fixed, breaks and it hits ground? Then we're in trouble. But once I saw him putting the housing back together, there's giant plastic fins that separate each one that's part of the housing that holds everything together. And then on top of it, there's giant strain relief for all the cables feeding in that bites down on it. So I'm not too concerned anymore about it jumping over or anything like that. He was able to plug it in and it worked. It absolutely worked. I was completely blown away. After a bit, he took off and everything. But as I kept thinking about the repair more and more, and this is a good thing, bad thing, I don't know, it depends on your point of view. I kept thinking about the fact that, I'm messing with power, and power is not something you want to take even the slightest bit lightly. You could do a repair on a keyboard or a Game Gear or a console or VCR, whatever. And if that repair fails, it just goes back to not working anymore. But when a power system fails, it could start a fire. So I kind of got a little bit worried about that, and I thought and thought and thought on it, and eventually, like a day or so afterwards, I reached out to him and said, "Hey man, I really feel like we didn't necessarily put a fresh tire on your car. We put a spare tire on the car, and you can get around on that spare. You should be fine, but don't drive it like you have a brand new tire on." The whole reason this came about is he was gonna get it replaced, but he just didn't have time for the turnaround time to get it RMA'd and replaced or whatever for him to go to this thing that he'd had plans to take the van to in the first place. And so he promised me that he would not, and he had no intentions really of doing it. He really didn't have that much power. He was future proofing his system for when he knew he was going to have more power hungry things. But at the current time, he has a very simple solar system, very not insane amount of current. I can't remember if he quoted me any numbers, but he told me he's not going to. He also had a thermal camera, and I said, use your thermal camera to check on those lugs. If that lug's hotter than the other lug, that's because it's not making as good of a connection, and there's going to be resistance, and that's going to turn into heat, and that's not going to be good. Mentioned all that to him, so I really, really, really feel. I hope and I feel though that he understands the danger there. And I even went so far when I brought this up to mention to him, hey, in your van, make sure you have a fire extinguisher, specifically for electrical fires and things like that. You absolutely want to have something to put out a potential electrical fire, because that's always going to be a possibility when you're dealing with a system like that and you're running wires, you're doing it yourself. And his build is a work in progress, so there's always a chance that something could damage something else and then you can have another problem, kind of deal, a Rube Goldberg of catastrophes. So either way, it was, and that's something as doing repairs, I always need to try to keep in mind and everything. That as invincible as I feel when I fix stuff, I need to remember that those repairs are not invincible, that they can fail. They could either be on my part, it could be the manufacturing part, it could just be the way it's going to be. It could be an entropic fact that it is just going to fail. And if since I was the last guy that touched it, it's on me. I'm the last fingerprints on there, and it's on me. So you always want to keep that in mind. I feel like when you're repairing and working on things, and you always want to, I don't think I needed to put my hand up and say I don't think I should work on this, but I was very, very close to. And giving that disclaimer to my buddy, I think kind of helped him realize, like, hey, man, this is a genuine concern I have. I just want you to be safe. Make sure that, you don't overwork it. I think he got it, but we'll see. Below, feel free to comment on any times you've done any repairs or you've had any repairs where you felt like it was a little bit shaky and you genuinely worried, like, man, is this going to start a fire? Is this going to destroy something? Maybe you had a simple repair and you worried that exact same thing. Even though it was completely unnecessary, you still fretted like, oh my gosh, what if, what if? But yeah, leave a comment below if you ever did. And don't forget to like the video and subscribe if you've never been here before. And I'll see you guys next time.